complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messed up.
All right, George Bagby, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's wonderful to be back with you.
I know. I'm happy to have you on. This should be no surprise to any of the listeners, but I've started to get to the size where I get a lot of comments, and I read them all because I'm interested in getting feedback. And even months after you and I have discussed a topic, we'll still be getting comments. Like our first one on slavery, I still get comments on. Our one on marriage, I still get comments on. So I think that those videos have been extraordinarily well received. And so I'm obviously, because we're friends, but also just because the audience seems to enjoy it, I'm happy to have you on.
Well, that's a fun thing to know about. I'm aware of the comments on the videos, but I can't say that I watch them. Every once in a while, I go back and take a look at them. But I'm kind of consumed by my job right now, and I'm looking forward to scaling back from that and doing other things with my time. I'm working 60-hour weeks right now, which is just brutal.
Yeah, I've done it before, and it both the the additional hours, but also just limiting the time you have for everything else just consumes you. Because when you factor in work and then just kind of like the daily activities, it's like, oh, there's almost nothing left. Especially for something as as much of a luxury as recording a podcast for an hour, right? As compared to things that are a little more vital.
Well, I was talking to my wife about our subject this evening, and she was very concerned because she thinks that I'm blackpilling too much. And I was trying to reassure her that I was going to take all of this in a positive direction. But certainly my rides lately, for those of you who don't know, I'm Ubering full-time in New Orleans. My rides lately have really had a dark sort of character because college has come back. All the college students have returned to town. And so I've been driving around. I don't know why this is. Maybe I don't really notice the frat boys as much. I know what to expect with those guys, and they're generally very good rides for me. They don't annoy me, even if they are vulgar. It is the female college students that genuinely upset me. The Tulane girls that I've been hauling around, they talk with no modesty. If I could boil it down to one thing, it would be that. They describe things in front of me as if I wasn't there. I think the worst that the frat boys do is they expect me to be one of their group and to laugh at what they want to laugh at, which doesn't annoy me so much. It is women talking about things that they should never talk about in front of a man, especially in front of a strange man,
So there's an event that was kind of pivotal in our relationship, and it's when you and I want to say definitely resumed contact, but it was sort of when we started speaking more after I went away to college. And I think it was after my freshman year of college, and you invited me and my close friend, my old roommate, to speak to your high school students about what college was like. And I had a very similar experience that you did at the time, and I as I've said before, I did drop out of this school, but I was going to a prestigious small liberal arts school, very expensive, and actually and the many of the women there were much like what you've described, at Tulane. And I've seen that culture, and it's genuinely poisonous. And so when you sent me a series of messages about this, based off of your experience, it was something that that kind of resonated with me. So because this is, your topic and, you're the one who brought it up, I'll let you, kind of control the direction of this. So obviously, I think that there's, should we say, just kind of like a baseline level of, college hedonism that you sort of expect, right? It's not good, but this is different than that. So how would you describe, what makes this, I don't mean to say this culture or these like set of attitudes kind of different from what you would consider like just, kind of general poor behavior?
Well, I'll preface this by saying that you might as well write me off as a hopeless member of the patriarchy if you haven't already. If that's what satisfies you, then you can just write me off that way. Um, I'm I'm not really sure what most women hope to gain from college to begin with. And I suppose the regular misbehavior of college guys does not faze me so much. The fact that men will go off to college, young men especially, will go off to college and drink too much, engage in risky or dangerous behavior, showing off, doing tricks, daring each other, challenging each other at uh, the entry into fraternities or whatever, and womanize as much as possible. That does not surprise me in the least. The fact that young women are doing this surprises me, partly because I've scarcely seen that in my life. Um, Granted that I went to college, even that I went to graduate school, that was not my scene, and that was also not my school. My school specifically prohibited that kind of behavior and did not allow it. Uh, I went to a very conservative school with hard limits. So, say whatever you like about that I was sheltered or something. Whatever. I knew that stuff was going on. I just haven't seen it. And now I see it at a much later age, and it's really outstanding to me. It's young women of college age who are openly preying on men, and this is really shocking to me. I'll give one anecdote just to illustrate. Not only do these young ladies talk to each other about all the men that they've bagged in various places. They travel around the world. They're all on Tinder. They seek out men of means. They bed them and they get resources from them. And they're very open about this with one another, like what they're doing. They're after men of a certain social class. They're after men with money. They are after the resources of these men. And they seem to move on very quickly to the next one. The most egregious example of this sort of behavior were these women that were upset with one of their number, a member of their sorority, who had seduced the boyfriends of the other girls, and when she was discovered, started accusing the men of rape. And the women were all talking about this. Now, to their credit, they thought that was immoral to accuse those men of rape when the young woman was seducing them. But that's just an example of the sort of extreme female misbehavior that I've been witness to. I just sit there in the front seat while they talk about all of this, and I try not to get involved, but I don't forget about it. I keep thinking about it. So they're just consuming men. Now, do men consume women? Absolutely, they do. The difference, I think, I think that men are much more easily interested in more than that. If you can understand me, men can become obsessive, or if you will, autistic about any number of things. And a great many of those things are very valuable to society. So the man that may womanize in college may become an engineer or something, and that's exactly what these guys at Tulane fit the description of. The women, though, why are the women doing this? To listen to these women, I get the impression, and this is an impression, and I'm not ideological on this point, but I get the impression that a significant number of these young women are in college specifically to get attention from men. And that is a terrible reason for them to go to college. It is bad for the men to have all these distracting young women around out to seduce them and get resources from them. And it's particularly bad for those young women who are degrading themselves. And what do they expect to get out of this? Well, if they're very lucky, they'll find one of these young men who is willing to marry them in spite of their previous behavior. I think most of them will remain single and will have nothing but experiences or memories to show for their behavior after all of it's over. And I think that it's going to be very bad for them in the end. I think they will end up one of these large numbers of American women who are projected to remain single and childless into middle age and, of course, beyond. And that's very bad for them. I think it is, and write me off if you feel like it. I really don't care. It's worse for the women than it is for the men.
So one of the things
that kind of behavior is extremely damaging, in particular to women. I think that men can bounce back from that much easier than women can. And I also think it's much more natural, and even let's just call it natural, for women to be more interested in relationships than men, which is why women obsess about bagging men, and that it's much more important to them than it is to the men.
So one of the things that I think is interesting, and this is actually something that you taught me, is how birth control essentially changed the calculus of sex and dating. And what you have is, and I say this as a recent college graduate, is that the math that many women are playing with is very different than the math for men. Because in kind of a level playing field, right? Many of the things you do at college would be male dominated, right? Before Title IX, obviously, sports were dominated by men. And when you have things like, many of the kind of high earning degrees, the STEM fields, right, that are required to, bring in a certain number of women, there creates essentially a support network, and a support network for bad behavior, right? So at almost any state school, right, there will be a women's center, right? And the purpose of the women's center is essentially to subsidize this type of lifestyle, right? And whether that's through contraception, treatment for venereal disease, access to abortion, all of those basically serve as a way for the institution to subsidize that. And so basically what you have is this kind of like push and pull, where on one hand, there's, shall we say, just like natural base human instincts. But in a previous era, those were held back by prudence, right? Like if what that woman had done had resulted in a child that she was, saddled with, it's very likely she never would have done it. Obviously, some did, but there was a negative pressure on that. But when not only, as I've outlined, and that's kind of boilerplate conservatism, right? That produces that behavior. Right. But also you have cultural attitudes that is empowering. So one of the really interesting things is that the war on slut shaming has successfully been won. Like really the idea of a slut, the idea of, bad sexual behavior for women is effectively been abolished. That's seen as empowering. And so in a perverse way, right, the same things that, feminists in the 60s and 70s were railing against, right? Sex work and, women, dressing, scantily at, boozy parties, right? Well, that's now empowering. And so when you mix that with, a relentless culture of, you need to achieve, you need to beat men. There was it was a hashtag for a while. I don't even say what a hashtag. It was kind of a cultural meme, to make men cry. And the whole point was, like as empowered women, as feminists, as boss bitches, whatever you want to say, we're going to kind of deliberately, entrap and entice men into falling in love with us so that we can kind of throw them away. And we can say some of that is just baseline human corruption. Women like attention, men have their own foibles. But there's another part of it that this is being pushed at a cultural level. There's this is something that I was talking to someone who's only slightly older than me, right? So kind of in their late 20s. And she reminded me of this. Again, it's another cultural meme. And it was this phrase that went around. It was like, it was girl boss, gatekeep, and gaslight. And the whole point of it was like to be like a cool, empowered woman, you've just got to act completely ruthlessly, specifically kind of towards men. And it's interesting because it's like the war between the sexes has sort of reached a point at which you could say, right, that the war between the sexes has been going on for whatever, the last 80, 100 years. But it sort of has got to this point where, and you can see this in the data, that, more and more people are just opting out of it. That's just like a horribly, I guess, like it's an impossible landscape. And I feel lucky that I've kind of sidestepped that. But anyway, Bagby, to get back to your point, the reason I brought all of this up is to say that type of culture that you brought up, right, at Girls from Tulane, that is downstream of a lot of kind of memes about how basically high status women behave. That isn't organic, is what I meant to say.
Well, these women often enough talk about how their fathers fund this lifestyle. Now, I don't think their fathers really know about all of the flings that they have. I don't think that they bring that up at the dinner table. They bring it up enough with their friends, but they also talk about how their mothers want to vicariously experience their lifestyles. Their mothers come stay with them. Their mothers come drink with them. Their mothers give them relationship advice. And it's like their mothers are empowering this sort of behavior. So I'm not under any illusions, or I try not to be, about our cultural situation, or what the anti-culture is like today. This is the antithesis of what builds up civilizations. This is what brings civilizations down, ultimately. But I know that you're right. This is something that's been mainstreamed for a long time, and I hear from friends of mine about the dating situation today, what that's like, and it seems very, very dark to me. I know a lot of friends of mine want to be married, want to have families, and kind of openly express to me their despair of finding that kind of loyal connection. The mainstream, the norm of relations between men and women seems built on an idea of unfaithfulness just from the outset.
One of the things that, and obviously this is, fully redacted, but, there's a friend of mine who's my age, and he's very much in that position. And I was talking with him, because he had been in a long-term relationship, over a year with a girl, and then called it off, kind of to many people's surprise. And so I asked him about it, and he basically said, she told me, all I wanted to do in college was find a guy who was going someplace and then give up. And I think and basically the implication was, he was her meal ticket. And to give him credit, you know, to give him credit, he, basically called it off, right? But it's sort of an attitude that's, I don't know. I feel like you and I are lucky in the sense that we kind of sidestepped it, because I don't know, like, when you're on when that's the level of trust you're dealing with, that you're essentially just a meal ticket. I could understand why, so many people feel hopeless.
I think that if we looked at relations between the sexes on a more utilitarian, long-term basis, we'd be in a much better place than we are right now. And I say that because we're all going to get old. We're going to lose our vitality, our looks. Now, I think that is obviously much more important to women than it is to men. Men can get old, and we are still going to be interested in things that give us drive and purpose. All right? What drives older women? What drives healthy older women in your experience? Well, let's think of some examples. Which ones do you know? Your great aunt, your great grandmother. All right? Think of them. What gives them drive? Your own mother. What consumes their lives? What are they most interested in? Their grandchildren, their own children. Those relationships, those close organic relationships, are what give them drive and purpose when their youth and their vitality, their good looks are gone. Now, that's not the same as it is for men. All right? Yes, that does give men satisfaction. Men like to be admired. Men like to know that they are attractive to the opposite sex, that they are pursued by them. Yes, that does give us satisfaction. But that is not the main thing with us. Men are often, if not always, primarily interested in other things. Get satisfaction from pursuing and understanding and mastering other things. Though I'm not writing off the man that is most interested in women. That's his main focus. Or interested in his own marriage, for instance. That can be a male obsession too. But I'm not saying that that's the normal thing. That's not the main thing. Women that will not have children, women that will not experience motherhood, women that choose to eliminate that as a possibility are dooming themselves to a special fate. I think a particularly evil fate for a woman. And where was I going with all of this? You were saying utilitarian relationships. If we could look at marriage and family life in part as a relationship of convenience and necessity, I think we'd be in much better shape than we are now. What I hear from a lot of my college students, and it, not surprisingly, it's the female college students, it's the women college students that are talking about relationships constantly. I'd say that's the only major subject they have. And I'm not complaining about this. Okay, I think that's natural and normal, even if their obsessions are unhealthy. They will not have a natural satisfaction in their lives because they have ruled out motherhood as a life achievement. They talk very openly about how they do not want children, even if they are to be married. They talk very openly about how they do not want children. One night, just recently, I was particularly disgusted with the group that I had in the car. And they were going on and on about anyone who has a child is a chump, is ridiculous, is stupid. They obviously don't know how to prevent them. Okay. And I have my daughter, my youngest daughter, on my cell phone wallpaper. And I show her off to my fears fairly frequently, right? It comes up. What do you do when you aren't doing this? Oh, well, I'm a father, right? I pull up a picture of my daughter on my phone. So I just press the button on my phone and my daughter's face pops up. And I know exactly what happens when I pull up a picture of my daughter, or when I show my daughter to college girls, for instance. They melt. They can't help themselves. They just go, oh. They just give this long sigh because she's beautiful. She's lovely. She's worth one's life and devotion, just like they were to their parents. So I pull up my daughter's photograph, and I couldn't help myself. I was rude to them, deliberately rude, because I was angry with them. These are all young people in the prime of their lives. And in a healthy age, they would all be having children now. And they would want them now. And I said, she'll be with me when I die. I won't die alone. And coincidentally, I was pulling up to their stop just then. So I pulled over, opened the doors, and said goodnight. And I didn't get a bad review. Probably deserved a bad review from them, but I wouldn't. But
So
that's
one of
long-term views. What I'm saying is long-term views. We're going to be old. What are you going to do with yourself when you're old? What did your grandparents do? Those are old people that you have a connection to. Whose pictures were on their walls? Yours. You gave them drive. You gave them purpose. You gave them satisfaction and a sense of achievement with everything they've experienced their whole lives. And they wanted to go on for your sake. That's something to aim for. What kind of 70-year-old do you want to be? That's what I'm getting at here.
So my wife had an interesting observation, and it was based off of an acquaintance who has kind of fallen for many of these lies. And her line was basically, I think that male attention, especially like mediated through the internet, is just as addictive and just as harmful as as porn is for men, right? That it has that same addictive warping tendency to it. That it sort of provides, on one level, more stimulation than a normal kind of biological relationship could ever provide. But, like anything that's sort of, twisted from its creative purpose, it lacks anything real. And so it's sort of like a dark version of, like the myth of the fairy meal, right? It's the magical feast where you eat all night, you eat, your fill of the best. And then when you wake up the next morning, it's dust in your mouth. And so it's sort of this like horrible lie that these women are being told, because they're simultaneously, wasting the time that they have to be, setting up the steps to have a meaningful life. That is a time sensitive thing. And also distorting their minds to make it incredibly difficult to ever go back to any semblance of a normal relationship, right? They've experienced highs of attention, highs of desirability that a normal relationship could never meet. One man can't provide you the same amount of, attention, or the same amount of, I guess, like, obsession, that, any number of guys, you're all talking to at once through the internet. And sort of that way, I see it as kind of the mirror image of, the digital harem, right? Like an unlimited number of, infinitely varied, sexual partners. They're kind of mirror images of one another in that way.
All of this makes sense, considering the popularity of platforms like OnlyFans among women.
Right.
Women are addicted to getting casual male sexual attention. That really is a high for them. But it's also equally bad for them, as is pornography for men. You're absolutely right.
So you mentioned you wanted to relate this to the topic of patriarchy, and then bring in some Chesterton. So I assume that our viewers will have at least kind of a baseline level of familiarity with the concept. But do you want to define it, just so everyone's on the same page?
Yeah. The idea of patriarchy is the rule of the father, that fathers ought to rule. So some might take that as, well, men with children, men who are taking care of families, those should be the ones with a franchise. Now, that's actually a Republican theory right there. Those are men with a stake in the future of their communities, because they've actually brought the future out of their own bodies. And they're taking responsibility for it by raising their families, taking care of their wives and children. That in itself is an interesting theory, but I'm not leaving it with just Republican theorists here. It's not really theory at all. It's organic human behavior. This is how human beings naturally act. So if we can go back into anthropology just a little bit, we know that human beings differ, male and female. He created them. And because of this division of labor between the sexes, men, not only do they have this obsessive quality, if you will take it that way, that they get interested in particular things and they specialize. That's the normal male life path. They specialize in knowledge, they specialize in ability. You go out there, you meet doctors and car mechanics and things like that. And these are typically men who have specialized. And then they pair off with the women, and the women have children. This is a natural consequence of men doing what is natural with women, the way that Homer put it. That's actually a phrase that Agamemnon uses in the Iliad. Agamemnon is returning Achilles' concubine to him in the Iliad by way of apology for crossing Achilles. And Agamemnon says to Achilles, "I did not do what is natural between men and women. I swear by all the gods that she is untouched." And that is Homer's phrase for this, which I like. I think that's good. You put men and women alone together, this is what happens. I don't think the United States Navy understands that, for instance. But just as an aside, the natural operation of the sexes produces children, and women are naturally devoted to their children. If they weren't, the kids would die. They wouldn't survive. I have a really good book on my shelf by Carol Wojtyla, I think is his name. He's the man who became Pope John Paul II. It's a wonderful book called Love and Responsibility. And among other things, it is a long exposition of the Catholic doctrine of natural family planning. I think that's one of the ways that they put it. It's a book about sex, and being written by a man who became the Pope, it's not really what you would expect. It is a book of ethics, and it's extremely good. I highly recommend it. Though I am not Catholic, I'm entirely convinced by it. And I think that it's extremely heartening. It's actually a very encouraging thing to read, as well as enlightening. He says in there that women become mothers by a natural process. Their bodies physically change, as well as the way that they think. Their thoughts change through the manifestation of motherhood. But that men must choose to be fathers. A man may become a father without ever knowing it. And so men require social pressure to embrace fatherhood. So I'm in that I'm just noting it's a different process for women than it is for men. And that maybe that's part of why I find it so deeply disturbing to encounter all these young women who scoff at motherhood. And you know, at least to one another, they write it off entirely. They don't want to be mothers. I think that is a shocking black pill. But patriarchy, going back to that, the idea that fathers take responsibility for their families. Fathers must take responsibility for their families, because women, when they become pregnant and when they become new mothers, are in a very vulnerable situation. They should not be expected to work. They should be provided for. And that should be a social norm, that they be provided for. This is not an ordeal that they should go through alone. This is not something where they should be expected to fend for themselves. They are sacrificing their bodies for the future of the human race, for the future of their families. And that is where men must embrace the responsibility and provide and rule. And men are particularly fitted for rule. The end of all government is finally violence, legitimate violence. And men are built physically to deal out both violence and judgment. Men are capable of combat. Men are capable of physical actions, of strength. Women are physically different than men. Women are not set against men in contests of strength, in contests of physical exertion. And that is because they cannot compete equally on those levels. They are unequal physically and mentally and emotionally. And that is not to the detriment of one and the exaltation or superiority of the other. They are built for different things. Men and women are built for different things. And this is one of the reasons why women, when put in charge of something, are going to be very merciful. Because women have been designed by our Creator. They're designed to deal with children. And this is right. This is good. This helps make the world go round. And women are going to accept the transgressive child again and again and again. And it doesn't matter how far he goes astray, they are always going to welcome him back. The man will establish a hard line. It is the man who came up with the sentence of execution. It is the man that came up with the sentence of exile. It is the man that imagined the penal colony. It is the man that imagined the stocks. No, you will not get out of this. 10 lashes. 8 hours in the stocks. Go. And he sends the other men, of course, the gendarmes, the soldiery, to carry off the sentenced man, right? And I'd like to draw a contrast between systems of justice, right? It is the modern system of justice that has come up with innovations like the penitentiary and has done away with things like capital punishment and corporal punishment, which are both very masculine solutions to wrongdoing. Right? What is the replacement? It's a feminine, passive contrast. Well, all of this to say, Chesterton, in his wonderful book, What is Wrong with the World, he wrote a section called Feminism, or the Mistake About Women, which can hardly be more provocative in chapter titles. But he says at one point, the feminist is one who dislikes the chief feminine characteristics. And instead, he paints a positive picture of what women are designed to be doing. He says, unlike men, women aren't designed to specialize. And his ideal of the female is ultimately that of the Virgin Mary, which is a wonderful traditional thing to identify as a feminine ideal. And what is the Virgin Mary? She submits to the will of God and embraces motherhood. Just in a very short thing, a short vision of her life. In doing that, she has a role in the salvation of the world, which is really overwhelming. It's the ultimate nurturing role. But Chesterton paints beautiful pictures of what motherhood consists of. He says, women develop all of their second bests, whereas the man gives them all up and embraces one. And that becomes the thing that masters his life, that consumes his life, if you will. He goes off to, specialize in one thing typically. And Chesterton addresses the critics that say, oh, well, the domestic life is so boring. Chesterton says, well, the woman gets to develop all of her second bests. She is a cook. She is a storyteller. She is a craftsman. She is a decorator. Chesterton says, in response to his critics, when people begin to talk about this domestic duty as not merely difficult, but trivial and dreary, I simply give up the question. I cannot, with the utmost energy of imagination, conceive what they mean. When domesticity, for instance, is called drudgery, all the difficulty arises from a double meaning of the word. If drudgery only means dreadfully hard work, I admit the woman drudges in the home, as a man might drudge at the cathedral or drudge behind a gun. But if it means that the hard work is more heavy because it is trifling, colorless, or of small import to the soul, I say, I give it up. I do not know what the words mean. To be Queen Elizabeth within a definite area, deciding sales, banquets, labors, and holidays, to be Whiteley within a certain area, providing toys, boots, sheet cakes, and books, to be Aristotle within a certain area, teaching morals, manners, theology, and hygiene. I understand how this might exhaust the mind, but I cannot imagine how it could narrow it. So, ironically, Chesterton says, women are broad. And that is a very positive view. And it's a domestic view, right? the end of man is not just to be the isolated individual, it's to be the member of a group. It's to be the member of a family. And a man, to be a member of his family, he must govern it. He must set down standards, rules. And what is the happy vision for a woman? It is, yes, it is to be devoted to one man, to be loyal. We must be loyal. This is a universal problem in our day. Disloyalty, unfaithfulness, not just between lovers, but between friends, between colleagues, associates. We must be loyal. That ought to be something that we offer to the world that makes us attractive to those outside of our circles. We must be loyal. Do not betray. Never betray. But what is the vision with women? Not only to be loyal to a man, but to be devoted to her own children. That is something that gives us purpose beyond the adventurous period of our younger lives.
And there's sort of something, and this is oddly enough a feminist critique, that one of the problems with kind of like feminist modernity is that it's very difficult to be an old woman. You know, with kind of a traditional understanding, you know, you become, you know, a maiden, then a mother, then a crone, right? And each one of those has its positive, I guess it's positive associations, it's positive assumptions, right? There's a series of privileges and duties that come along with each one of them. But in discussing, you know, your experience with the girls from Tulane, right? You mentioned that, you know, their mothers are all with them trying to vicariously live through them, you know, relive their youth. And there's something kind of sad and undignified about that, because it's absurd on one level. You know, they're obviously old enough to have children in college. But I think part of it is that there's not really a role for a woman of that age. And I think it's also the genesis of the wine aunt, you know, the cool unmarried older woman, you know, quote unquote. And obviously, you know, there have always been spinsters, there have always been widows. But that's not the same thing. And to me, it's another symptom of the fact that there is just, you know, a breakdown in the social order. And there's a breakdown in, I guess, the assumptions of what was owed to and owed by, you know, each of the sexes to each other. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as you've been talking about patriarchy is the concept of just rule, right? Well, what's the difference between a monarch and a tyrant? Because obviously, you know, when the patriarchy is commonly invoked, it's used to describe, you know, male tyranny. And it's sort of a fake bastardized version of how people act. Obviously, men have acted poorly. You know, it would be absurd to say otherwise. But one of the examples I think that is kind of helpful in examining this is what happened on the Titanic, right? The idea of women and children first. And so consequently, right, in the Titanic, a great disaster of, you know, in an age in which that was held true, quite a lot of men died. You know, that obviously, you know, being the man, being the patriarch, the head of the household, you have on one hand power, but on the other hand, things are expected of you. You know, in the classical understanding, to be a patriarch, to be a citizen, you were expected. I don't like the word citizen, but it'll stand in for this, right? That you were charged with the common defense. You know, essentially, you know, if the barbarians came, well, guess who's on the wall? You know, it's you. It's your sons. You know, you are the one, you know, designed or being, you know, set up to bear that burden.
Well, absolutely, and there still is a social expectation there. If there is a knock on the door in the middle of the night, who should answer the door?
Right,
I don't know a typical woman to say it should be them. If there is a man in the house, it should be the man of the house. We still have that phrase. That's actually a legal phrase. The man of the house. He is responsible. He should protect. Absolutely. If there is a snake on my front porch, I know I'm the one that's going to be sent out there to deal with it. And I should be the one. You're absolutely right.
And I guess and I've been reading, which is kind of a funny pairing, reading de Maistre and Foucault at the same time, because they sort of have completely opposite versions of authority. And it's all downstream from the buried assumptions that we see in Paradise Lost, right? That essentially any form of arbitrary authority, any form of authority which can't be, should we say, like rationally justified in every instance is tyrannical. And in any specific instance, you might be able to say, well, I can't think of the reason. That might not make sense. But when viewed, over the course of centuries, right, you see it now, and it's like, well, what does it mean to be an empowered woman? Well, it means essentially that you get to, sell pictures of your body on the internet for lots of money, and to kind of, bastardize a common phrase. Well, that sounds like prostitution with extra steps, right?
Right.
And it's sort of this, monstrous situation in which everyone is miserable. Absolutely everyone is miserable. There are very few people who say, like, yes, like this is great throughout their entire life. This is a sustainable way for people to live. But there's this like deeply encoded belief that you can't go back. We were in chains before, depending on which specific group is at, the center of discussion. And it's just one of those things where it's like, there's the system is producing more and more miserable people. So Bagby, we're sort of coming up on time, and you mentioned that you actually wanted to end this on a positive note. And so far, I don't know if we've done a great job, but you do have a note of hope in this, correct?
Yes, I do, and that is that men can still rule. We have smaller domains. You were talking just before about tyranny. I don't know if I don't know what my current experiences have to do with my perspective exactly. I see a lot of feminine tyranny right now, a passive sort of tyranny, or a tyranny that forces you to be passive, managerial tyranny, which is, I think, uniquely feminine in its quality. I prefer something more clear cut, right? The rule of a man, even an evil man, has a number of positive characteristics compared to what we are dealing with right now. I don't know, but I'm in a unique situation in my life, so I'm sure I'll offer myself criticism at some point on this. But the idea of patriarchy, what does that mean practically for us? Well, I guess I could come up with something for the women if I gave it some thought. But my main audience here is men, unattached men, or even married men, or men with someone steady or a fiance. We ought to follow the precept of the Delphic Oracle, which said, "Govern your women," which is one of the surviving oracular proverbs from Apollo's Pythia at Delphi. And that is like a primordial Western proverb, but I say it's a universal one. I think that it is of tremendous importance that we take that one to heart. Men ought to take responsibility. Now, I have friends that say, given our circumstances, we might as well treat it all like a game and get what satisfaction we can out of it. Let's play the field with these women. I say that's firstly a waste of time and effort. Now, I know when a guy is 20 years old or so, it is going to give a different level of satisfaction. But where is it going to leave you when you're 30? When you're 40? You would have wasted a lot of your effort, of your wealth. Spend your effort and your wealth instead on a woman that's willing to be guided by you. And I think that it is well worth time to make that something upfront. Are you willing to follow my lead? Are you willing to give me some faith? A woman that is unwilling to give those things is a woman that's playing you. And men should not indulge that. It's if you must move on and you must continue your search, then do so. But don't indulge that. The verses from the first chapters of Proverbs have come into my mind in a different way than they ever have before, since I've started my new work. And I mean, I'm literally driving prostitutes around town now, so I'm connected to that side of life in a way that I never have been before. But the verse in Proverbs that warns against the strange woman whose footsteps go down to death and hell, that has been a really strong thing in my mind lately. Let's think of the opposite of that. What is the emblem of the feminine? What is a healthy woman? What does that character look like? That is the cheerful mother of children. That's what a healthy woman looks like. It is a positive, nurturing thing. It is not the devouring thing. It is not the consumer of men. So I guess I'm kind of turning this all on its head. I remember when I was a teenager, and then all the way through my 20s, I thought that men that consumed women were the worst thing in the sexual marketplace, that those were the villains. It was the men. But I never knew, I never understood what it was all like. I'm looking back on it now with a different perspective. The women that consume men are uniquely bad. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't bad men out there too, but men should not give that any energy. It doesn't matter what they offer. It's not worth it. And it does make the situation worse. At the very least, we can avoid making the situation worse if we understand the situation. So what is the healthy woman? It's the woman that will be loyal. It's the woman that will follow the lead of her man. Let him lead. And will support him from the home front. And it's the woman that wants the future. The future of humanity comes to us through women. They are the future. This is why we say women and children first. And this is why men traditionally sacrifice themselves for that higher good like they did with the Titanic. That is a very positive, constructive vision, what we see with the men sacrificing themselves when the Titanic sank. So that's the kind of thing we should look for. Any woman that expresses disgust at the idea of children or motherhood is a woman alienated from herself. And unless you think that you can turn her around from that, you should walk away from it. Those are the legs that lead down to death and hell. Any woman that thinks that male headship in the home is something to be undermined, something to be destroyed, something to use the legal system to subvert, that's not someone that you want to be around. That is someone who's dangerous to you and your interests. And what we need to look for in this landscape is the cheerful mother of children, the woman that wants to be a nurturing mother of children. That is the destiny of most women. Not to say there aren't some nuns out there or some spinsters, or bless them, couples that cannot have children who want them. They have a special role in society. That is a special ascetical role. And I don't want to overlook them. I was in their ranks for a time and did not know if my wife and I could have children. So I have a special feeling for them. But finally, ending with Chesterton. Chesterton starts his book. He says, "What is wrong with the world is that we do not ask what is right. We must have a vision of health." And so the vision of the healthy home, the healthy husband, the healthy wife, the healthy father, the healthy mother, what do those things look like? Those are the things we should want to be. And we should not do things that head away from that destination. We should go towards that destination. So, gentlemen out there, you want to be husbands, you want to be fathers. Think about that. Think about what that means. What can you do to further that destination, to get to that place where you're a father and a husband and you're successful? You're doing what a husband should do. You're doing what a father should do. That is not a womanizer. So don't do it. That's a waste of your time. It's a waste of your energy. And it's to nothing. And any lady listeners that we have, you want to be a wife. You want to be a mother. You want the loyalty of a man, not his fleeting glance, not his meaningless passion. You want something that will last further than that. You want a man that will continue to be interested in you when you do not have your looks anymore. Wouldn't that be nice? Being old is going to be most of your life. What you consider to be old, that will be most of your life. So focus on winning the loyalty of a man by offering him yours. That is health, and that builds up civilization. Think of the story of Odysseus, just in conclusion. Odysseus was away from his home for decades. He did not have any connection to his wife or his son. And after adventures and final shipwreck in which he lost all of his companions, he found himself on the island with Calypso, the goddess, who loved him, who wanted nothing more than to make love to him forever. And she was immortal and eternally beautiful. And she offered Odysseus immortality and eternal youth if he would stay with her. And Odysseus said no. Odysseus had what Homer calls nostalgia, a longing for the home. Odysseus wanted his old wife back in Ithaca. He wanted to raise his son. And he turns down Calypso's offer. He turns down many other things too, basically every ultimate temptation that a man could encounter. And he goes back to his wife. And actually has to win her over, convincing her that it's really him. And it's wonderful that that is a story at the dawn of our civilization. That it's a man that turns down all temptations so that he can have his home and his wife who's loyal to him. And Penelope's loyalty is actually a major theme in the Odyssey. The fact that she does not want the suitors who are all courting her hand while Odysseus is away. She doesn't want all that trouble that is undermining the order of her house, and she wants Odysseus to come and restore order to her household again. And that's part of the victory of the Odyssey, the final merging together of all the themes of the Odyssey in the end. When Odysseus does come home, he slaughters the suitors and wins back Penelope, and his household is restored. That is the energy that builds a civilization. And I love the theme of loyalty in that.
So Bagby, we're at time. If people want to find more of your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
Well, you can look me up on YouTube. Like I said, I've been working very hard, so I have not uploaded much content to YouTube lately. I want to change that soon. But I do have a page on YouTube where I have recorded a lot of essays. I've got a couple of audiobooks there. You can find my work there. I'm also on Telegram. I have a channel called Bagby's Corner if you want to follow my escapades in New Orleans.
And again, thank you so much for coming on. I think this was a good discussion. As far as my stuff, you guys know where to find me. The show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you want to listen to episodes. This one is pre-recorded, so people who pay me money will get access to it a little bit before it hits the main feed. But if you're looking for a way to support the show, my sponsor AXIOS has cut me a new deal where now if you sign up for their program, any program, and use the code Beaver, I get a little bit of a kickback for it. Which again, look, I supported AXIOS basically just for free training. I liked their product enough, I didn't even get paid for it. But, now that there'd be a way to get a little bit of money, I'd really appreciate it. It'd be good for you, obviously, and good for me as well. And again, Bagby, thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And everyone at home, remember, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.